Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Round 6 Application Workshop. This is Ryan Silver. I'm the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, AHSC Program Manager. And today we're going to walk through the current round of AHSC guidelines and all that it entails. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues from the Department of Housing and Community Development, Air Resources Board, and Strategic Growth Council. The AHSC program is administered by SGC, implemented by HCD, and is part of CARB's portfolio of California climate investments. All three agencies work collaboratively to bring this program to what you see today. On SGC's side of things, I'm joined by our housing analyst, Judith Hinn, and our technical assistance lead, Shep Wilbin. At the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, we have John Moore and Wendy Fuentes presenting today. And at the Air Resources Board, we have Layla Atala. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please post them in the question and answer box or the Q&A box that you see here. We'll try to answer these during the presentation, but we'll certainly answer all questions over the Q&A period that will follow the PowerPoint presentation. We are scheduled today for 2.5 hours, although the PowerPoint itself will be more about 75 to 90 minutes. Again, after that, we will take a break, and then we will begin our question and answer session. You'll see here is the rest of the outline of today's presentation, but again, please, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A box. That is how we will be answering questions during the presentation and during that Q&A session. So I'm going to pass off the mic to Wendy.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk to you today about the program overview and the thresholds. Right now, we're looking at the timeline of what we have already completed as far as the Round 6 AHSC program is concerned. We are at the NOVA workshop. This is the last workshop that we will be having for this round. We will be having consultations going on. We started on the 15th. We'll have them 16th and 17th as well. So make sure you sign up for those when that is mentioned. Our applications will be due on June 8th, and we will have award recommendations released on October 18th, and the awards will be adopted by October 28th. As you can see by this graph, we're showing you the emissions by economic sector. We have had 425.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in reduction in total California emissions for 2018. If you look at the chart, we have the transportation sector showing 41%, industrial 24%. Electricity is at 9%. In the state, and for imports at 6%. Also shows you agriculture and forestry at 8%, and our commercial is at 5%, and our residential at 7%. Next. So the vehicle miles traveled is very important. We are definitely working on the reduction of these, and you may ask yourself, why do we drive so much? Two of the biggest reasons is because we lack the location efficient housing, and we lack of quality low carbon transportation options. Next. So the AHSC program vision is definitely to fund infill projects that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and also the vehicle miles traveled through the sustainable use of land, the housing, and the transportation practices. We want to make sure that we are bringing together affordable housing and transportation worlds. Next. Here we have an accomplishment chart which shows you what AHSC has been able to do we have funded 1.6 billion awards in rounds 1 through 5. You can look at the affordable homes that have been funded, the transportation that we have helped with, and the changes in the economy and the climate. We have actually accomplished 269 million fewer miles driven in a car each year through the program. So it's extremely successful and doing very, very well. Next. Here we show you a chart of the funding. So annual funding until 2013 right now is 20% of the proceeds from cap and trade. In round 5 NOFA, we had 550 million. And we have total award funds to date from rounds 1 through 5 of over 1.6 billion. For round 6, we will have approximately 405 million, of which the minimum award will be 1 million and the maximum award will be 30 million. Next. So what does AHSC program fund? So we have eligible capital projects, which are affordable housing developments, basically loans for brick and mortar. We also have housing related infrastructure grants, which are required as condition of approval. And we have the Sustainable Transportation Infrastructure Grant, which includes transit vehicles, bike lanes, sidewalks, and transit operations. And we also have the transportation related amenities, which is also a grant for bike parking, repair kayaks, urban greenery, shelters. The eligible programs are 3-year grants. We have active transportation, transit ridership program, air pollution reduction program, the workforce development program, and the low income car share. The types of projects that are eligible are in 3 categories. We have the transit-oriented development, which is known as TOD. We have the Integrated Connectivity Project, which is known as ICP, and the Rural Innovation Project Area, which is known as RIP. For TOD, we have some requirements for high-quality transit. You have to have an affordable housing development. 50% of the funds to affordable housing and or housing related infrastructure are required. At least one of the components listed are necessary. You must either have sustainable transportation infrastructure, or you can have transportation related amenities, or you can use the funds for program. There's a required minimum density of 30 units per acre under TOD. Under the ICP program, you have qualifying transit, which requires 50% of the funds to go to affordable housing or housing related infrastructure, and sustainable transportation infrastructure. You also require at least one additional component of either transportation related amenities or program. And the minimum required density is 20 units per acre. In the RIP, we have the requirement is 50% of funds to affordable housing and or related infrastructure and sustainable transportation infrastructure. You are also required to have at least one of the components of either transportation related amenities or programs, and the minimum density required is 15 units per acre. The award distribution for the funding is going to be 35% TOD, 35% ICP, 10% RIPA, and 20% discretionary. Now, who is eligible to apply? There's a variety of eligible applicants, and these may include local governments such as city, county, or the city and the county. Also, transit agency or operator, joint powers authority, university or community college districts, qualified tribal entities, also local transportation agencies, regional transportation planning agencies, school districts, developers, public, private, or nonprofit, in addition to public housing authorities, congestion management agency, facility districts, and program operators that could be either public, private, or nonprofit. So we have some statutory set-asides. 50% is available funds are for affordable housing, and 50% of available funds are to disadvantaged communities. The map here shows you the disadvantaged communities in California, and disadvantaged community status is determined by the location of the affordable housing development. So keep that in mind. Some of the samples would be affordable housing, greenery, bike lanes, pedestrian pathways, expansion of bus routes, bus shelters, sidewalks, and urban greenery.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm going to just give a couple examples to conceptualize what's mostly been requirements on paper by showing you all some recent awarded projects from the 5th round of AHSC funding, our latest awards made in June of 2020. This first project is a transit-oriented development, or TOD project, Mandela Station in Oakland. This project was developed in partnership with Bay Area Rapid Transit on the site of the Mandela Station BART. It received nearly the maximum award amount of $30 million. Over 2/3 of that went towards funding their housing loan, and the rest was for transportation and programming costs. It's located in a disadvantaged community and developed in partnership with BART's Station Area Master Plan. It's a mixed-use development at 240 total units, nearly all of them affordable. It includes complete street projects with nearly 2 miles of new bike lanes, secure bicycle parking and wayfinding improvements at the transit station, and working with a local bicycle advocacy group for program funding. The project purchased multiple BART cars for service improvements in the area. This next project is within our integrated connectivity project category. It's the Entrada project in Riverside. This project was also a disadvantaged community, scoring in the top 5% of Cal EnviroScreen, which is how we determine disadvantaged community eligibility. It received just over $22 million. $13 million of that was for the affordable housing development loan, with $3 million for the housing related infrastructure, and the remaining nearly $6 million for the combination of sustainable transportation infrastructure, transit related amenities, and program costs. This project was also awarded through SGC's Transformative Climate Communities program. So AHSC funding went towards the construction of 65 units. The housing related infrastructure was for sewer, water, power lines, and other required public right-of-way improvements. And transportation funds were used for the expansion of Riverside's multimodal transit hub, the addition of nearly 1 mile of protected bike lanes, and miles of pedestrian improvements, and 3 new bus stops. The project also creatively used solar panels to shade pedestrian walkways adjacent to the transit station. Program funding was used primarily for transit passes for the larger community rather than just the affordable housing development. And there was also a partnership between Riverside Transit Agency and the developer, Oakland, on how to best utilize local transit options and inform the community of those. Our final case study is a Rural Innovation Project Area, or RIPA project, in Arcata. This was our first ever tribal project awarded through AHSC and actually funded through our tribal funding set aside. The project received nearly $11.5 million, about 3/4 of which went towards affordable housing development costs and housing related infrastructure costs. The project includes 36 total units, all of them affordable, a multi-use trail, which you can see highlighted on this map, though it is quite small, a pedestrian bridge, and zero emission vehicle charging infrastructure, as well as pedestrian walkway improvements, and the addition of electric bus service. So you can see from all three of these projects, they are integrated in nature. They combine active transportation with housing, with transit, and other community development projects, which gets to the heart of AHSC's intent. I'll pass this back to Wendy to describe our threshold requirements.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and look at the thresholds for the program. We have 25 total requirements and guidelines. The key project requirements are the transit station or stop needs to be within a half a mile of the affordable housing development. You must demonstrate greenhouse gas reductions through fewer vehicle miles traveled. And the project construction cannot be commenced as of the application deadline. And that is very important. For tax credits, either 4% or 9%, per the guidelines, a single affordable housing development capital project may not include more than one affordable housing development, nor may it include an affordable housing development that contains multiple development sites when one site is receiving 4% low-income tax credits and another site is receiving 9% tax credits. This scenario that was presented actually requires separate applications if that is the case. Your project must also be shovel ready, and what shovel ready means is that you have your CEQA and EQA already ready for affordable housing development. You have discretionary land use approvals. You must demonstrate site control. You must have developer experience and no active or pending litigations. And you must comply with the housing element and have committed funding thresholds met. The programmatic goals require that you demonstrate BMT reduction, that you have sustainable community strategy implementation, that you have agricultural land preservation, that there's components of urban greenery, and you may also have transit passes for residents. Your buildings must be smoke-free, and there should be adequate lighting for public spaces. You must meet the affordability thresholds, and you may have broadband readiness. For your ICP or RIPA, you must be completed and offering services to the transit station or stop no later than the issuance of the certificate of occupancy for the affordable housing development. And for TOD, you must be offering services at the time of the application. Next. For transit passes, the requirements are that at least one pass per restricted unit be for at least 3 years, and the pass should be able to cover commute entirely, which means you will have a minimum of 40 commute rides per month, and you can be also have unlimited free passes, discounted passes, or reloaded transit cards. And for discounted passes, you want to make sure that at least 50% is paid for by the grant. And you will be rewarded in qualifying and QM for larger subsidy, and do not contribute to the 500,000 program cost cap. Is not part of it. For your enforceable funding, the project must demonstrate a level of committed funding at the time of application that is greater than 0.90, calculated by the equation listed below. So we have the AHSC funds requested plus the enforceable funding commitment minus the deferred costs over the total development costs minus the deferred costs. The HRI grant request for homeownership affordable housing developments will not be counted as part of this equation and therefore are exempt from this EFC threshold. For affordability, you want to make sure that at least 20% of the total residential units are affordable units. You want to average affordability of at least 50% of the area median income for all restricted units. And we have an example for a 20-unit project with units restricted to 40% and 60% AMI. The calculation of the average affordability would be 10 units at 40% AMI is 10 times 40 equals 400. 10 units at 60% AMI, 10 times 60 is 600. So you have 400 plus 600, 1,000. So 1,000 over the 20 total units equals your average affordability of 50%. So that's the example. For home ownership projects, you may go up to an average of 80% of the affordable median income for all restricted units. And for the agricultural land preservation, your project must not result in the loss or conversion of agricultural or working lands. And we have the use of the farmland mapping and monitoring program tool where you can verify. And there are exceptions for infill projects in 3 of 4 sites or 75% of the perimeter. For your environmental clearances, we have the affordable housing development and the HRI components of the AHSC project to demonstrate environmental clearance. So you want to make sure that the time periods for filing appeals or lawsuits must lapse within 30 days of application, that's due date. And for FTI and TRA components of AHSC projects, you have until the initial grant disbursement to demonstrate all environmental clearance. For air pollution, we have the compliance with state building code. 2019 building code requires MERV 13 filtration in all new housing. And the outreach and education on reducing health impacts to residents of affordable housing developments, another requirement. And for anything else, you want to consult with your local health department. Now we will have Judith and Ryan present scoring.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Wendy. My name is Judith Tin, and I'm part of the AHSC team at the California Strategic Growth Council. Today, I will be going over the AHSC scoring components. AHSC is a highly competitive program, and we have up to a maximum of 100 points available. Within the 100 points, we have divided the points into 3 separate sections. The first section is the greenhouse gas reduction, which is calculated through our AHSC calculator tool, which we will go over in detail later. And this gives you a maximum of 30 points. We have a second section, which is called our quantitative policy scoring section, and that gives you a maximum of 55 points. Then it goes to our narrative-based policy section with a maximum of 15 points available. Because AHSC is highly competitive, the intent is to get as many points as possible. Going over the greenhouse gas emission reduction points, we offer 30 points maximum. 5 of the 30 points would be based on greenhouse gas reduction transit-wise. And then for the greenhouse gas reduction related to housing, active transportation, and renewable energy, we offer 10 points. And for the GHG efficiency, we offer 15 points. The efficiency is calculated by taking the total GHG reduction and dividing it by the AHSC request amount. Each category is divided into 20% increments. through a binning process. If your project is in the top 20% of the GHG reduction within your project area type, then you will receive the maximum points and fall into bin 1. Remember, binning is calculated based on project area type. For example, all transit-oriented development will be ranked against each other. Likewise with the CIP and the RIPA projects. Next slide. Next, we go into our quantitative policy scoring. This has a maximum of 55 points. This is our largest scoring component within AHSC. It's based on a checklist type approach. This is the category that you will have the most certainty about your score. AHSC staff will review the score and send you a score letter. You do have an opportunity to appeal your score. Once again, the intent is to get as many points as possible. In the next few slides, I will go over a breakdown of all the components within the quantitative policy scoring. So our first component within the quantitative policy scoring is the active transportation improvements. And the total points for this component is 10 points. Context-sensitive bikeways. Please refer to our definition in the guidelines. Any proposed context-sensitive bikeways over half a mile from the affordable housing development will receive 2 points. Anything less than half a mile will be eligible for 1 point. Bicycle network connectivity. This show if projects propose the affordable housing development linked to a bicycle network. It could be an existing bicycle network or a planned bicycle network identified in the local planning document. And it does not have to meet the context-sensitive bikeway definition. Maximum point for this would be 1. Then we have the bicycle network connectivity, bicycle network gap closure. So you will get maximum 2 points for each gap closure. Well, actually you get 1 point for each gap closure that you propose, and it has a maximum of 2 points. And then now we have our safe and accessible walkways. Project proposing over 2,000 feet will get the maximum point of 2. Anything under 2,000 feet will get 1 point. Pedestrian network connectivity. This follows the same concept as the bicycle network connectivity. And then pedestrian network gap closure. Once again, you get 1 point for each gap closure with a maximum of 2 points. This is an example of the gap closure that we wanted to go over. So if you can see in the picture, if that bridge, that overpass bridge wasn't there, and the measurement based on our, our guidelines, we'll go over it in details. If you're able to construct a bridge, an overpass for walkway for pedestrian connectivity, you will be able to earn points. Other examples could be like underpass or canals connecting walkway crossing. Next, we have our green building and renewable energies, where you can earn up to 10 points. You can refer to the guidelines. We have an energy efficient graph within the guidelines. Projects implementing any of these green systems as part of the housing component and verified by a certified energy rating professional may earn the maximum point. AHSC guidelines also provides options for commercial components. The bottom score, the bottom of the screen also shows the electrification, which gives you a maximum of 7 points. So projects can earn up to 7 points for all electric design with no gas hookups. For projects that have 2/3 of the major appliance electrically powered and electric design ready, you can earn up to 3 points. Housing and transportation collaboration. This one earns you up to 9 points. For STI funds requested as a percentage of the total AHSC requests, if you get 25%, you can earn up to 6 points. And below, additionally, you can also receive 2 points if your transit investment is over 5% of the AHSC funds, and projects with funding from other GGRF programs will be able to receive 1 point. Location efficiency and access to destinations. In the AHSC guideline, there's a link to the EPA Walkability Index that you can refer to. Most walkable projects will receive 3 points. Anything above average will receive 2 points. Any key destination will only be considered once, and you will get 1/3 of a point for each destination. Leverage funding. Enforceable funding commitments as a percentage of the total AHSC request. So if your EFC is of 200 and over, you get 4 points. Anything 150 to 199%, you get 3 points, and so on. So for example, if your project request is 20 million and you bring in 40 million leverage by 200%, you're eligible for the maximum point. Low income tax credit, equity contributions, and tax exempt bonds in connection with the 4% and 9% low income housing tax credit will not be included in this leverage funding equation. Anti-displacement strategies, you can earn up to 6 points with this. If you prevent displacement of local community residents, you can earn up to 4 points, and preventing displacement of locally owned businesses will earn up to 2 points. Local workforce and hiring practices. Projects that implement at least one workforce strategy, examples including partnership with a community-based workforce development and job training entity, partnership with a pre-apprenticeship program, and partnership with local workforce investment board programs serving disadvantaged communities. A workforce development organization is a community-based organization. This differs from partnerships with workforce development boards, which is the second scoring option, as workforce development boards are government-affiliated agency and only one exists per region. Both of these partnerships require submission of metrics that detail their success in placing individuals into career pathways. Housing affordability, 5 points maximum. These points are available for targeting units with extremely low income affordability requirements. If a project has 20% or more of its restricted units dedicated to the extremely low income, you will receive the maximum points. Programs, 2 points. So you can earn up to 2 points by implementing the following programs: active transportation programs, transit ridership programs, criteria air pollutant programs, workforce development programs, or low-income cost-sharing programs. Percentage of total units restricted to extremely low-income residents. The points for that would be 1 point for the eligible program, and then if the program is funded beyond 3 years, you get another point. This does not include the transit pass programs. Next, we move on to our narrative-based policy scoring. 15 points max for this section. All projects that score at least 42.5 points move on to the narrative section. So within the narrative policy scoring section, you earn up to 4 points if you show collaboration and planning. For community benefit and engagement, we provide up to 6 points. Community climate resiliency is 3 points, and community air pollution exposure mitigation is 2 points. Narratives are evaluated by a panel of subject matter experts, and our guidelines points out several air pollution mitigation strategies that you can refer to. This score cannot be appealed. Narrative-based policy scoring resources. Planning and educational resources are available within the AHSC guidelines. Also, what's very valuable is our narrative rubrics on the California Strategic Growth Council website. You can also view the past project narrative scores on the California Strategic Growth Council website, and the FAST application narrative. The FAST application portal can also provide additional information. Next slide, please. Collaboration and planning, 4 points. So you get 4 points when you show successful local planning efforts. Identify local planning efforts the project implements, explain local agency involvement in creation of the project. Some tips: be very specific and explicit. Also clearly lay out the roles of local agencies and community members in creating the project components. Next, we have community benefit and engagement, which you can earn up to 6 points within this narrative section. The community engagement and leadership portion of your project is very important. Describe in detail collaboration with residents and meaningful and a community engagement that is meaningful to the project development. This requires extensive planning ahead of time. So start early and include a plan for future engagement to set yourself aside from other projects. Community climate resiliency, 3 points. We use the adaptation assessment matrix to list climate vulnerabilities for project area and actions to mitigate vulnerabilities. Describe how potential impacts are taken into consideration in the design of your project and how adaptive measures address these impacts at different points in the near future. A few tips: use the adaptation matrix to identify all possible vulnerabilities for the area. Link the vulnerability and proposed adaptation measure, and consider adaptation for the entire project, not just the housing element or housing portion of it. Community air pollution exposure mitigation, 2 points maximum. You identify pollutants of concern using the environmental screen 3.0 or other reliable data source. Identify known source of pollution in the project area and describe how air pollution mitigation exposure strategies are used in the design of your project. Remember to focus on community scale, not just indoor air quality. What are the local sources of air contamination and how does project reduce exposure to them? More severe exposure means more consideration is needed. Next ahead, I will go ahead and pass this on to my colleague Ryan to discuss key topics within AHSC.
Thanks, Judith. So as Judith just mentioned, I'll just cover quickly a few key topics that we've already received some questions on. The first topic I'm going to cover is AHSC's award process, which did receive some changes this latest round. So the majority of AHSC's award process is consistent with round 5 and previous rounds. First and foremost, AHSC will award the top scoring projects within each project area type. That is our 80% of funds for project area targets. To reiterate from earlier, that's 35% of funds to TOD projects, 35% to ICP projects, and 10% to RIPA projects. Only after those targets are met do we get into the remaining 20%, also referred to as discretionary funds. The discretionary funds, there's new to this round a more explicit process or statement of objectives for use of these remaining 20% funds. These changes would result in the following process for awarding funds. First, AHSC is going to ensure that its statutory funding target is met, which is at least 50% of funds are awarded to projects located within disadvantaged communities, which again is determined by the location of the affordable housing development. Next, we will make sure that the tribal funding set-aside is met. That is at least one project from a qualified tribal entity that is otherwise fully eligible will receive an award. After that, the remaining discretionary funds will be used towards a geographic distribution. That is new to this round, and it sets a target of awarding at least one project in each of the 8 geographies across California. These geographic targets are a pilot for this round and will be evaluated further in future rounds. And the 8 geographies are based upon HCD's Regional Early Action Planning Grant allocations with some adjustments. Each of these 3 objectives within discretionary funds can be achieved in tandem, which means that a single project could achieve multiple objectives. Historically, AHSC's disadvantaged community investment has been met through its project area targets, aside from last round, which did require use of discretionary funds. That is to say, discretionary funds may remain a full 20% until all those, all these three objectives, it is possible to be met before using any discretionary funds. The next topic, which also received a question in our Q&A box just now, is around restoring of transit service. So in recognition of the variety of impacts to transit service as a result of COVID-19, we are allowing projects to qualify using pre-COVID-19 levels of service. So specifically, TOD projects using the high quality transit definition and rural innovation projects and ICP projects using the qualifying transit definition. Those definitions can be met using levels of transit service provided prior to the pandemic. And we're asking applicants to submit proof of that service at some point between January of 2020 and the time of application. This allowance for pre-COVID-19 levels of service also affects our STI eligible costs, specifically for transit service expansion. Projects expanding transit service in an STI eligible cost can use their current levels of service and do not have to rely upon pre-COVID-19 levels of service to meet the definition of expanded service. That is to say, for example, a project or a locality that experienced service cuts for its transit during the COVID-19 pandemic could choose to return service to pre-COVID levels of service using AHSC funding. Another change made this round was specifically to our consideration of leveraged transit vehicles, or transit vehicles purchased using a mixture of AHSC funds and outside funding sources. In the GHG scoring section, GHG reductions resulting from new or expanded transit service, I mixed up my notes here, so forgive me. GHG reductions from transit vehicles purchased should be entirely funded by AHSC or else mostly funded by AHSC. And I'll clarify here using some examples on the next slide. If a project is purchasing a single transit vehicle, then at least 50% of those funds for the transit vehicle must be paid for using AHSC. If it's purchasing, or a project is proposing the purchase of multiple transit vehicles, then all of those transit vehicles, aside from one, must be entirely funded by AHSC. If a project is proposing multiple modes of transit vehicle purchases, for example, a bus and a van, or a van and a light rail vehicle, or any other mixture, this rule applies to each of those transit vehicle types separately. So here I'll just show a couple examples of how this would be implemented. So for a project, first of all, purchasing multiple transit vehicles of the same type, in this example, 3 buses, all but one of those vehicles must be entirely funded by AHSC in order to quantify those GHG reductions. That last transit vehicle needs to be at least 50% funded by AHSC. It can be greater, but at least 50%. For a project purchasing a single transit vehicle, again, in this example here, just a single bus, at least half of those funds must be supplied by AHSC. And finally, we have an example with multiple transit types, here with 2 buses and 1 rail car. For the buses, you can see this rule applies, where the first vehicle must be entirely funded by AHSC and the last vehicle must be at least 50% funded by AHSC. For the other mode of transit, the rule applies separately. That is, this rail car must be at least 50% funded by AHSC. So if there were a second rail car purchased here, that second rail car must be entirely funded by AHSC because the 50% rule can only apply to one vehicle per transit mode. The final change I'm going to discuss is to our enforceable funding commitments consideration. So low-income housing tax credit equity contributions resulting from either 9% or 4% low-income housing tax credit or bonds do not require a tax credit reservation letter in order to be considered an enforceable funding commitment. This change will align our consideration of 4 and 9% tax credit equity contributions, which is to say they will be treated equally. This is a change that will be active for round 6 of AHSC, but may change in future rounds. Oh, and one more change to discuss actually is our changes to the definition of context-sensitive bikeways. So this definition is how we quantify the quantitative policy points for active transportation scoring. If a project wants to be scored for the length of bikeway improvements proposed, those bikeway improvements need to meet our definition of context-sensitive bikeways. This round, we have aligned with a contextual guidance memo from our partners of the Department of Transportation. And you can see here the specifications laid out for each type of bikeway. Rural areas have their own, or RIPA projects have their own separate classification from ICP and TOD projects. And you can see a definition within our Appendix B or Appendix A for our definition section, the guidelines for what we classify as a rural main street. So next up, we're going to have John from HCD describe the AHSC Application Workbook.
Thank you and good afternoon. This portion of the webinar is dedicated to a high-level overview of the AHSC Application Workbook. Next. The application workbook can be found on the HCD website, www.hcd.ca.gov. You click on the grants and funding, then click on programs active, and finally click on affordable housing and sustainable communities, and that will bring you to the AHSC webpage. Next. Next slide, please. On the AHSC website, you will find the guidelines, NOFA document, and application. Next. The completed application and associated attachments will be submitted through the FAST portal. You will need to create an account in FAST in order to access that and to be able to submit your application. Next. For those of you who have submitted an AHSC application in the past, you will be pleasantly surprised to notice a few improvements to this year's application. This year's application, generally, we took two previous applications, the universal application and the supplemental application, and we combined them into one application document. This resulted in 15 less printed pages and a 22% reduction in the size of the document. It eliminated duplicate entries that we were requiring, and so this should be a much more streamlined and user-friendly document. The application will flow in the order of the guidelines. So have your guidelines in NOFA open when completing the application. Next. In addition, the application contains guideline references to help you better understand AHSC requirements and scoring criteria. You only complete the yellow shaded areas. Do not copy and paste information into cells, as this could corrupt critical formulas in your application. Complete tabs in order from left to right, starting with the Overview tab and ending with the Attachment tab. The application has many links and formulas that function from left to right data. Fast uploads identified with orange shading throughout the document ensure all fast uploads, including applications, are To ensure all fast uploads included in the application, please use the designated file names associated with those orange or salmon colored fields. Next. This is where the application resides on the AHC webpage, which I guided you to you earlier. Round 6 application denoted by a red arrow, and then there's some additional information for the 2020 AHSC rent and loan limits. Next. The second tab, or the Overview tab, this is where you start in the preparation of your application. Depending on what you select in the project area type, whether that be TOD, ICP, or RIPA, and what you later select down the eligible category area will reveal additional tabs for you to complete at the bottom of this spreadsheet. So in other words, you won't see tabs that aren't related to the type of project that you are applying for. Next. Generally, as I said earlier, just complete the yellow tabs, yellow cells, excuse me. If you hover over a cell, instructions will be revealed and some cells will change colors when you complete them. This is the AHSC application spreadsheet. Here's the colors change that occurs if you do not enter information that meets some critical program requirements. In addition, you'll see here on the second arrow the instructions that will appear if you hover over one part of the cell. It'll tell you what needs to go into that cell. Next. This is a document upload checklist tab at the end of the workbook that you should use to ensure all required documents are uploaded into FAST. The column that says uploaded to HCD means that you're uploading your document into FAST. This is a compilation of all the orange or salmon colored fields you'll see throughout the document. If you have any issues with the application, there is also an application support tab you can complete and email to appsupport@hcd.ca.gov. The development team will respond to your inquiry and will assist you in addressing your need. Next. In closing, coming soon, there will be some additional guidance that we will be posting on the AHSC website to assist you in the preparation of the application. We will be posting an instructional video on completing the AHSC application workbook. We will post sample organization resolutions, and we will post organization document checklist. So that concludes my presentation. Next will be Layla to present GHG emission reductions and co-benefit quantification.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Layla Atalla. I'm part of the AHSC team at the California Air Resources Board, and CARB's role with AHSC is to provide guidance on how to estimate the greenhouse gas, or GHG, emission reductions and co-benefits associated with proposed AHSC projects. So today I'm going to give a brief orientation to the process of quantifying the benefits of proposed AHSC projects. I'll describe what is quantified, what tools are used, what resources are available, and then I'll provide an overview of the quantification process. Next slide, please. There are 3 main quantification resources developed by CARB staff that we'll discuss today. First is the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool, and that's available on the CARB website here, along with a user guide and quantification methodology. The user guide is accessible via a link in the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. Applicants will complete the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool as part of their AHSC application package. The user guide is meant to provide step-by-step instructions for how to fill out the tool. It also contains an example project showing how the tool is used. The quantification methodology contains details on the equations and data underlying the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. So if you have questions about how to use the tool, the user guide should be the first stop. The quantification methodology is only necessary for folks who have questions about the underlying methods. Lastly, CARB is also updating an FAQ document throughout the application period. It's also on this website, and questions that are applicable to a broad range of applicants, will just add them to this document throughout the solicitation period. Next slide, please. The AHSC Benefits Calculator tool uses project-specific information to estimate GHG emission reductions and co-benefits associated with proposed projects. Some co-benefit examples include criteria and toxic air pollutant emission reductions, renewable energy generation, and travel and fuel cost savings. The co-benefits are estimated using, for the most part, the same inputs that are required to quantify GHG emission reductions. However, only the GHG emission reductions are used for scoring per the AHSC guidelines. The co-benefits information is used for reporting purposes on selected projects only. Next slide, please. So every round, CARB staff review the quantification methodology and benefits calculator tool and revise them to make them more user-friendly and appropriate to the projects and the program guidelines. Some changes for the Round 6 AHSC benefits calculator tool include updated underlying data such as the GHG emission factors and fuel economy values for passenger autos and job-centered data. More options for project-specific inputs, for example, carbon intensity and fuel consumption inputs for transit vehicles, and useful life input for bike share. Equations to estimate benefits for additional project components, such as transit fare reductions and conversion of Class 2 to Class 4 separated bikeways. Updated equations to estimate benefits from bike share and bicycle infrastructure, such as accounting for the emissions from bike share collection and distribution vehicles. In some cases, there's also simplified inputs, such as changing the ridership inputs for transit from daily to annual based on applicant and TA provider feedback. And finally, separating the summaries of GHG emission reductions by project component type in order to align with the scoring process that Ryan and Judith described. Next slide, please. Next, I'll give a brief overview of the quantification process. So each project is made up of multiple components, and the quantification methods in the benefits calculator tool are specific to each component type. Depending on a project's components, applicants will need to use different tabs of the AHSC benefits calculator tool, which is an Excel workbook. And additionally, some applicants may need to use one third-party tool, the PV Watts calculator. Next, please. The PV Watts calculator is applicable to projects that have solar photovoltaic components. PV Watts takes information about a solar PV system and estimates annual energy generation. And applicants will then add that information on annual energy generation into the AHSC benefits calculator tool. Some of you probably remember using CaliMod as an external tool for the AHSC application, the benefits calculator. That's no longer used as an external tool, and all the calculations, with the exception of the solar PV energy generation, happen in the AHSC benefits calculator tool workbook. Next, please. Now that we've covered what's quantifiable, I'll walk through the quantification process. I know that many of you are probably familiar with this already, so I'll try to highlight a few changes and frequently asked questions along the way, but just keep this high level. The first step is to use the project info tab of the AHSC benefits calculator tool to enter basic information on the project. A frequently asked question that comes up on this tab is what leveraged GGRF, or Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, funding is applicable. Applicants will enter only the other GGRF funding that's secured, requested, or anticipated from another California Climate Investment Program or a previous round of AHSC that supports quantifiable components of the AHSC project. So if an applicant is requesting $30 million from AHSC, they will enter that information. If they're also requesting or planning to use leveraged funding from the Urban Greening Program to plant street trees near the AHSC development, They wouldn't need to enter that urban greening funding because urban forestry is not quantified in the AHSC benefits calculator tool. Next slide, please. Second step is to refer to the user guide to determine what tools and data are necessary based on the project components. The user guide contains tables listing the required and optional inputs for each project component type, and it also offers default values for some inputs. For example, the user guide has tables of the default values for average trip length for different types of transit service. Applicants may enter project-specific data on trip length if that's available, or if it's not, they can use the default values. If using project-specific data, it's important to provide thorough documentation. Next, please. These next 3 steps all take place in the AHSC benefits calculator tool. The first is if the project includes housing, using the Affordable Housing Inputs tab to estimate GHG emission reductions and co-benefits associated with the housing development. When completing the Affordable Housing Inputs tab, you might notice that the GHG emission reductions from housing developments are slightly higher than they were in round 5. This is because of those updated emission factors for passenger autos that I mentioned earlier. Next, if the project includes new active transportation facilities or programs, you'll use the Active Transportation Inputs tab to estimate GHG emission reductions and co-benefits. On the Active Transportation Input tab, there are new project-specific inputs for bike share, such as the useful life of the bike share equipment or program. Then, for projects that include new or expanded transit service, capital improvements, or fare reductions, applicants will use the Transit Inputs tab of the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool to estimate GHG emission reductions and co-benefits. On the Transit Inputs tab, a change to note is that ridership is now annual rather than daily, as I mentioned earlier. For both active transportation and transit, we recognize that applicants have questions about how to reflect the impacts of COVID-19 on their projects. That FAQ document that's on the CARB website provides general guidance to address this, and in most cases, clear documentation is the key. Next, please. For projects that include grid-connected solar PV systems, there are 2 steps for quantification. First, use the PV watts calculator to estimate solar PV electricity generation. Then use the Solar PV Inputs tab of the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool to estimate GHG emission reductions. Solar PV systems can be part of an affordable housing development or part of a different component of the AHSC project, such as a transit station. If there are multiple solar PV systems in one project, applicants should complete the PV watts calculator for each system and then enter the total kilowatt hours generated into the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. And applicants may select the use of the majority of the electricity produced. For example, if there's electricity being produced for both residential purposes and transit purposes, the applicant would select residential as the primary use if that's where the bulk of the electricity generated will be used. That calculation about the major use of the electricity only affects co-benefit estimates for energy cost savings. It does not impact greenhouse gas emission reductions, doesn't influence project selection. Next, please. Once all inputs are complete, applicants should review the GHG summary and co-benefit summary tabs to check that the GHG emission reductions and selected co-benefits of the proposed project are fully populated. If there are any errors or blank cells on the summary tabs, ensure that all information from the previous steps has been entered correctly. Both the summary tabs show project benefits prorated according to the share of GGRF funding from AHSC and other programs. And lastly, use the checklist in the AHSC application workbook to ensure that necessary supporting documentation is provided. Some documentation is required for all projects, while some is specific to just specific project components. Next, please. So for further support throughout the application period, please reach out to the GGRF program email here and check the FAQ on the CARB website. We will be updating the FAQ throughout the solicitation period as we receive questions that are of general interest to applicants. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shep Wolben, and I am the AHSC Program Associate at the Strategic Growth Council. So now I will do a quick overview of the application review process to help you all better understand that timeline. Next, please. So at the top here is what amounts to the kickoff for the round, the AHSC guidelines, application workbook, and NOFA. They've all been released to get the 6th round started. We are currently in the pre-application phase. During this period of time, potential applicants are sort of working to understand the program and how their proposed projects can best align to apply, be eligible, and hopefully get awarded. To help you all do so, during this period, we try to offer a range of engagement opportunities and resources to assist with information, data gathering, guidance, and even technical assistance. But we'll return to that in a second. This period ends when applications are submitted. That brings us to the first phase of the application review, threshold review. Review during this phase focuses on determining if the application materials submitted and project components pass the eligibility requirements and are programmatic and statutory thresholds, but also, of course, that all materials are submitted and accounted for. Once the threshold review is completed, each project will receive an email outlining their eligibility determination, and that will be sent to their authorized representative. There's a 5-day period after receiving that letter or email where if the project wishes to appeal, they may do so. The next phase is the quantitative review process. During this stage, the quantitative policy scoring section will be reviewed by staff, and CARB will review the benefits calculator tool to determine the ranking and binning of the GHG scoring. This phase accounts for 85 of the 100 points available, and during that period, they will be reviewed. And like in the previous phase, there is a 5-day period after receiving notification during which the decision may be appealed. It's also important to note that as projects appeal, these initial scores might change for other projects, even if those projects do not raise an appeal. The next stage is the narrative review, where the narrative scoring section is reviewed to determine the final 15 points of an applicant's score. This score is, for this scoring section, there is no appealing option. And I guess additionally, during this phase, staff will be going through the process of ensuring the financial feasibility of each project as well. Once all of that is completed, staff will start finalizing the rankings and binning and ultimately each project's final score. Then staff will use those scores to determine their initial staff recommendations for award. Following that, the steering committee will receive and review these recommendations to make sure that the funds are being allocated along the lines that were previously described by Ryan. And then finally, The final recommendations will be posted roughly 10 days before the council is expected to make the awards, which is currently scheduled for October 28th. Next slide. Okay, as mentioned during the previous slides, during this phase of the AHSC cycle, the program tries to offer engagement opportunities and resources to help you all prepare. Next slide. One of the most important of those resources is the AHSC webpage on the SGC site. On the AHSC landing page, pictured here to the right, you will find the most up-to-date program timeline for this round. There's a link to our resources page, which will be covered in a second. And finally, there are links in the bar at the top of the page and sort of outlined here in blue, and also at the bottom of the page outlined in blue, for you to sign up for the AHSC listserv and email lists to receive the most up-to-date information on the program. Next slide. So here's our resource page layout as it stands currently. This is where you should look first for any documents or links you might need as you are starting to put together your application. In terms of information and data gathering, so here on the right side, 4 sections. These 4 sections are likely the most useful. Program information will contain profiles of awarded projects in earlier rounds and potentially updated fact sheets in the near future. In the previous award section, there should be a number of documents from the last 3 rounds, rounds 3 through 5, that could be of help in terms of scoping and comparing how your project components stack up. So reports outlining and summarizing the details of prior years awarded projects, the actual scores from the various sections, scoring sections of previous projects, full data sets for each round's applications, and finally, sort of at the bottom there, there's a link to the FAST application database to connect you to the portal that contains profiles for each of the submitted applications from prior years, where you can sort of download files for each of their submitted documents. Moving to the left corner is the program notices section. Under this section, we will be adding our FAQ document for this round soon. The FAQ is essentially a collector document for the questions we receive throughout our guidelines development and pre-application periods put into a single document for easy reference. And finally, we have in the top left the program guidelines section that includes links for the guidelines and supplemental materials. Next slide, please. To take a closer look at that section, once you click on the guidelines information link, the page to the right appears. Here, in addition to the NOFA guidelines summary documents, we will be adding most of our supplemental documents and guidance materials. That will include the narrative rubric that helps explain how the narrative sections are scored, the community engagement tracker, which is used to input engagement events and will be updated to factor in COVID adjustments that may have been made. The project area mapping guidance and the climate adaptation assessment matrix, which is also going to be updated for use with CalAdapt's new local snapshot tool. And I should note that both the engagement tracker and the climate assessment matrix, while supplemental, are submission documents that are used by reviewers to really understand the work done during the narrative section. Next slide, please. One of the more impactful resources we offer is our technical assistance program. Through the TA program, we have teams of technical assistance providers led by enterprise community partners that provide a range of services to help potential applicants prepare to apply. After the application period closes, TA providers offer capacity building help for those interested in applying in the following round. But right now we're currently in the direct application assistance phase of TA, and the TA providers are helping potential applicants prepare their projects and application materials for this round. And just to mention some of the broader sort of issues they can help with: developing the partnerships needed to address the different AHSC project components, the development of competitive project scopes, calculating GHG reductions, mapping the project area, figuring out how to budget and finance aspects of the project. And here down at the bottom of the page is the link to request technical assistance. And I believe we included that link in the chat at the beginning of the webinar. If not, we can put that in there once this is over. Next slide. And so also over the last round or two, our TA provider team has developed and compiled what amounts to a toolkit of topic-specific resources. And so they're outlined here on the left. And I should also mention that there are some of these materials with updates forthcoming. These documents are currently being hosted by Enterprise, the lead TA provider, on their website, and that link will be included in the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. So additionally, during the capacity building phase last year, due to the pandemic, the TA provider team developed a series of webinars. Each webinar is around an hour long and covers either an overview of the program, specific roles in the scoping and application process, or a specific topic of sort of frequent concern for applicants. These webinars can be found on the Strategic Growth Council's YouTube page, and that link is also included in the PowerPoint. Next slide, yeah. Finally, there are a few other ways that you can ask any additional questions you might have. We have consultation appointments still available for next week, where you can meet with staff to discuss specific questions. For other questions, you can send those to program staff using the 2 email addresses included here. And finally, you can enter the questions into the Q&A, and we can answer them now on the webinar. And with that, I will hand it off to Ryan as we move into the break.
Thanks, Shep. We, as Shep just mentioned, are going to take a short break here, give everyone a chance to take care of any personal needs. We will be back, let's call it 3:05. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. We have received a number of questions already there, all of which we have provided answers to, again, within the question and answer box. But please feel free to submit any others. In the meantime, again, we will be back at 3:05. But if we do not receive additional questions, we will just call it a day there. So again, we'll see you all again at 3:05 p.m.